So your offer's been accepted. Congratulations. I can tell you that it's not time to sit back and just wait until closing. There's still work to be done. Today, we're going to be talking about why it's so important to get a home inspection and 5 things that should be covered when you do have the home inspection done. So stick around and let's talk about those things. So it's the day of inspection. Once you get to the house, you're super excited because you get to spend time in your new home and you get to ask all of those burning questions that you've been waiting to ask for some time now. And it could be a few days since you've gone under contract and some of the emotions might have finally started to settle down a little bit, but there still should be that level of excitement. Now, when you get into the house and you start talking to the inspector, they should lay out just exactly what the next couple of hours are going to look like. Where they start, where they finish, when you're allowed to ask questions, whether or not they want you to follow them around. Most inspectors actually do like if you ask them questions while they're working. Now, you don't want to get in the way because it ultimately takes away from the amount of time that they can spend actually inspecting the house. But at the same time, you want to make sure that all of those questions that you have do get answered because now is the time. Here in Louisiana, if for whatever reason you want to walk away from that house during your inspection or due diligence period, you can do that and get your deposit back. And that's one of the reasons for that clause in the contract. So you definitely want to make sure that all of your questions are answered and you feel comfortable once you get to the end of your inspection day. So the very first thing that we're going to talk about today is the systems and what systems the inspector is going to go over and how those systems are inspected. So I'm just going to do a little disclaimer here. I'm not an inspector. I've been through quite a few inspections, and this is what the inspector that I refer all of my clients to. This is his process. So the very first thing that he does after he sits down and gives us a rundown of what the day is going to look like, he goes through and he starts the dishwasher. Now, appliances are going to be a separate section of this, but that's always what he does first. He always goes over and starts the dishwasher. After that, he dives into the systems. So your HVAC system, your plumbing system, your electrical system, all of those things get tested. So he's going to go through and check every plug that he has access to make sure that it's live and make sure that it has a ground. And then he's going to look at the panel and he's going to note what kind of panel it is. He's going to note age and condition. If he can, he'll take the faceplate off and make sure that all of the breakers are in good shape. He's going to look and see if there's aluminum wiring, if he can see that. I know some older homes that were built in the 70s have aluminum wiring. Aluminum wiring isn't actually as scary as it sounds as long as it's maintained the right way. And I didn't know that when I first started selling real estate. So it's a good learning curve to do some of that research. So that's a little bit about the electrical system. After your inspector checks out the electrical system, they're going to dive into the plumbing system. And the plumbing, basically what they do is they check all of the faucets and all of the spigots on the outside of the house to make sure that everything has water that's supposed to have water. They'll look under all of the sinks and make sure that there's no leaks. They'll check the hot water heater and note the model number and the age if they can find it, and give an average lifespan to, I guess, note when you can expect to replace that. That's a really good. It's a really good negotiating tip if you haven't asked for a home warranty already. And really, I guess overall, it's a good idea to use this as a negotiating tip for a home warranty if you think you're going to need it within the next year. And then he's also going to test your HVAC system. So he'll note the model number of the heating unit, and he's going to note the model number of the AC unit outside. And he'll note the general ages of each of those systems and the temperature variance from the time that he gets there to the time that he stops it. So generally what my inspector does is he'll go through and turn the air conditioner down to like 64 or 65, and he notes how long it takes to get to that temperature. Because here in Louisiana, the air conditioner is the most important because we don't really need heat that much. We do need heat, and we're coming on that time of year, but most of the time it's the AC that's constantly kicking. So we talked earlier about appliances, and one of the biggest reasons to test the appliances is just because most of those appliances are going to stay with the home. So anything that has a spot in the state of Louisiana has to stay in the home. So if it's fixed to the house and stoves are considered fixed, they have to stay with the home. So your dishwasher, your microwave, if it's mounted above the stove, and your dishwasher are all appliances that will stay with the home if they're there already. So your inspector will go in and he'll start the dishwasher to make sure that it runs and it runs the right way. And then he's going to go in and he'll turn on all the burners to make sure the burners work on the stoves. If it's a gas stove, he'll light each one of them to make sure there's gas flow. He'll light the oven to make sure that the oven kicks on and actually comes up to a decent temperature. He'll start the microwave if the microwave's mounted above the stove and is staying with the home. That's something that's really important. I had a client who looked at a house and every time the microwave was started, it blew the breaker. And we probably wouldn't have known that if we wouldn't have got an inspection. It's really important that we get an inspection even though it's an additional cost. Once he goes through and tests all the appliances, then he's going to move on to the structure of the house. So when we talk about structure of the house, we think of things like cracking in drywall and settling of the areas around the windows and crown molding and stuff like that. But it also could be something as simple as, does the home have trusses, or was the roof built board for board? And your inspector will actually crawl around the attic and give you that information. And homes that are actually built with trusses are known to have stronger roofs. So that's just a good little tip. And the other thing that's kind of pertains to the structure is going to be the insulation that's in the house. As they're crawling around the attic, they get an idea of how well the home is insulated. If they move around and there's pieces of insulation missing, they're going to take pictures of that, and you're going to have that noted in your report. So you can go in and move it around, and once you close on the house, and make sure that everything's sealed up. Or if there is really good insulation or it's blow-in insulation, then they'll note that too and take pictures. And the pictures are worth so much because it does allow you to point out like, oh, this is where this problem is. The other thing that the inspector that I use does is he actually goes around to each one of those windows in the house and he checks the latches to make sure that the latches lock for security. So if for whatever reason the window doesn't lock, he'll note that in his report. Moving on to miscellaneous items. So of course there's like a little catch-all bucket that we have to talk about. So some of the pictures or some of the notes in your home inspection might actually be missing fixtures. So if they go into the bathroom and the shower head's missing, or if for whatever reason you have a faucet in one of the sinks that are missing, or maybe you have a missing light fixture, they're going to note each one of those things in the inspection report. So you could potentially go back to the seller and say, we want these things replaced, or we want some money off because they're not there. And a lot of those things should have been considered in your original offer because a lot of them are visible, but there are some times, like the microwave situation that we spoke about earlier, that you might not necessarily know. So being able to utilize that inspection again for the negotiation is pretty big. Going back to the electrical system, so are there any exposed wires? So if they're climbing around in the attic and they see exposed wires or wires that aren't tied into boxes, in most places that's against code and it's worth noting. So we definitely want that called out because it could potentially be a safety risk. And that leads us into the next thing, which is all of those safety concerns. So if there's a staircase that has a loose railing, or if there's a staircase that doesn't have a railing to make that staircase up to code, each one of those things should be called out in the inspection. And if you have loose boards, or if you have peeling paint in places in a house that was built prior to 1978, if the house could have lead paint, so that peeling paint could be a safety concern. And then are there any odd features in the house? So like if you have a light that's controlled by 4 or 5 switches, or let's say you have plugs that are controlled by switches and you don't necessarily know why those plugs aren't working, your inspector will go through and try to figure some of that stuff out so you don't have to, and you know it going into moving into the house. And I actually had a client who you had to turn one switch on to get 2 other switches to work. So it was supposed to be a 3-way switch, but one of them wasn't wired as a 3-way switch. So that's just an interesting little quirk that could be fixed pretty easy by an electrician. So now we're going to talk about things that aren't generally covered underneath your home inspection. So if your home has a pool, or the home you're looking at or you have your offer in on has a pool, the majority of the time that isn't going to be covered as a part of your inspector's service. A lot of the times your inspector will recommend someone to come out and look at the pool to inspect it to make sure that it's functioning properly. So pools have pumps and filters, and sometimes they're saltwater pools and they have the chlorinator box that goes with it. Sometimes they have heaters, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into owning a pool. And it takes someone who's specialized in that to be able to come out and inspect it. Septic tanks are another one. So if your home has a septic tank, here in Louisiana, it's required that the seller actually have the septic tank inspected and pumped out prior to anybody closing on the house. You actually do have to have that to close. But if you, as the buyer, wanted to have the septic tank inspected just for your own knowledge, you can do that, but the majority of the time that's going to be an additional inspection. So that's going to be something that you're going to have to pay for separately. And then the last thing is any structural issues that you see in the house. So if you see any weird drywall cracking, so if the drywall cracking that you see is, I guess, it's not on 90-degree angles, if you see any like diagonal drywall cracking, that could be a cause for concern. A lot of people in houses that are built on slabs, like they are in here in Louisiana, the tiles are known to crack because slabs expand and contract as houses heat and cool themselves. So those structural issues could potentially be a cause for concern. So some home inspectors are structural engineers, and I do highly recommend using an inspector that's a structural engineer just for this purpose. You're likely to pay a little bit more, but it makes your negotiation a little bit stronger when you can say this person is a structural engineer or knows what they're talking about in that field. And a lot of the times, the inspections that I've seen, a lot of the cracks are cosmetic, so it's not that big of a deal, but sometimes they are. Sometimes there are major problems, and ultimately you need to know that when you go into the house. So if there's any questions that you have as far as your home inspections are concerned, leave them in the comments down below, because I would love to continue adding things that you might not know as far as the home inspections are concerned. If there's anything that I missed that you think is really interesting as far as the home inspections, you can also put that down below. And again, I'm Cody with eXp Realty, and I'm here in Lafayette, Louisiana. And if you liked this video, give me a thumbs up down below, subscribe to my channel, and then make sure you hit that bell button so that way you get notified as soon as I post a new video. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.